I, a 34-year-old guy who finally scraped together enough to buy his first house, ended up in a legal battle royale with my own flesh and blood. To understand why my parents showing up on my doorstep felt like a declaration of war, you need the backstory. Growing up, I wasn't just the black sheep of the family, I was the scapegoat, the punching bag, the resident problem child. My older sister, Melissa, was the golden child, the apple of my parents' eyes. She could do no wrong even when she was objectively, hilariously wrong. It started small. Like the time Melissa decided to redecorate the living room walls with permanent markers. My mom walked in, saw the masterpiece, and immediately turned to me with a, "What did you do?" Melissa, marker in hand, chirped, "It wasn't me. He told me to." Guess who got grounded for a month? Yep, yours truly. Didn't even get a chance to defend myself before I was banished to my room, dinner privileges revoked. Or the time Melissa borrowed my dad's credit card and racked up over $1,000 on makeup, clothes, and concert tickets. My dad stormed into my room, waving the credit card statement in my face, screaming about how reckless and irresponsible I was. Melissa, of course, put on an Oscar-worthy performance of shock and horror. "I would never!" she gasped, hand clutched to her chest like a damsel in distress. It wasn't until the bank called about purchases made at a Sephora 2 towns over while I was in detention that my dad realized his mistake. But even then, instead of punishing Melissa, my mom sighed and said, "She's just going through a phase. You should have told us she was acting out sooner." Like it was my job to babysit my older sister and take the fall for her crimes. By the time I was 16, I knew better than to expect fairness from my parents. But the incident that finally broke me still came out of nowhere. My dad's car, a brand new luxury sedan, vanished from the driveway. Turns out, Melissa had taken it for a joyride with her friends and wrapped it around a guardrail. The cops were involved, my parents were livid, and naturally, Melissa blamed me. She spun this elaborate tale about how I stole the keys, went out with some bad kids, and wrecked the car on purpose. I tried to tell them the truth, but they didn't believe me. My dad exploded, called me an embarrassment, and without even hearing my side of the story, decided I was too much to handle. They shipped me off to live with my grandma. And not just for a little while, this wasn't a time out. They permanently abandoned me. My dad literally said, "We can't have you here if you're going to destroy everything we've worked for." The kicker? Melissa got off with a slap on the wrist. And by the time I was gone, my parents had bought her a car of her own, a brand new car, because she was traumatized by the accident and needed it to rebuild her confidence. That was the last straw. I never went back home. Part 2. Grandma's Sanctuary. My grandma, bless her soul, took me in without a second thought. She lived in a small house, nothing fancy, creaky floors and furniture that had seen better days. But she gave me something my parents never had, a safe space. She believed me when I told her what really happened with the car, with the credit card, with all of it. She'd shake her head and mutter things like, "I don't know where your parents went wrong," but she never badmouthed them outright. That was just grandma, too good for this world. Still, it stung. My own family had thrown me away like yesterday's trash. No calls, no visits, not even a postcard to acknowledge my existence. Meanwhile, Melissa continued her reign as Queen Bee. My parents paid for her college tuition, even though she barely showed up for class. When she decided she didn't vibe with her major, they bankrolled a semester off so she could find herself. She used that time to travel around Europe with her boyfriend, posting Instagram-worthy photos of gelato in Italy and sunsets in Greece, all while I was working 2 part-time jobs to help Grandma with groceries. And then there was the house. My parents bought Melissa a house. After she graduated, barely, a whole freaking house. When Grandma told me, I thought she was pulling my leg. But nope. Melissa had posted a video tour online, showing off the granite countertops and walk-in closets. My mom even commented on the post, "You deserve the best, sweetheart." I sat there staring at my phone, wondering if these were the same people who couldn't even be bothered to ask if I was still breathing. The resentment was a bitter pill to swallow. I wanted to scream in their faces, to make them see how badly they'd messed up. But what was the point? They didn't care. They never had. So I stayed with Grandma. I worked hard, kept my head down, and focused on building a life for myself. Over time, I learned to block out the bitterness, most of it anyway. But it was hard not to compare my life to Melissa's. While she was living rent-free in her parent-funded palace, I was scraping together pennies, dreaming of one day having a place to call my own. While she was jetting off on exotic vacations, I was juggling work and community college, trying to carve out some semblance of a future. The worst part was the silence. Birthdays, holidays, milestones, radio silence. One Christmas, I caved and called my mom, hoping for some kind of reconciliation. She sounded annoyed, like I'd interrupted something important. "Oh, you're still at Grandma's?" "Well, Melissa's hosting Christmas this year, so we're busy. Maybe next time." I didn't cry. I'd run out of tears for them a long time ago. Instead, I doubled down on my goals. I wasn't going to let their rejection define me. I worked harder, saved every penny, and slowly started to build a life I could be proud of. Part 3. A home of our own. Fast forward to now. I finally did it. I bought my first house. It's not a mansion, just a 3-bedroom place with a decent backyard. But it's mine. And it represents everything I've worked for. Freedom, security, a place to finally put down roots. Actually, it's not just mine. Grandma's name is on the deed too. After everything she did for me, taking me in when my own parents threw me away, it was a no-brainer. Putting her name on that house wasn't just a gesture, it was a statement. This home belonged to the only real family I've ever known. And as fate would have it, that decision turned out to be the best insurance policy I could have asked for. We'd only been living there a few months when Grandma's health started to decline. It hit me hard, but I wasn't about to let her struggle. I hired a private nurse, someone to be there when I couldn't, to help with everything from meals to medication. It wasn't easy juggling work and caregiving, but this was Grandma. She deserved the world. It was during this time that I got the call. "Mom!" flashed across my phone screen, and I almost dropped the damn thing. My parents hadn't called in years. The last time I heard from them, I was 25, working my ass off at a warehouse job, and they called to tell me Melissa was hosting Christmas, so I probably wouldn't feel comfortable coming. Now, out of the blue, my mom decides to play concerned parent? Yeah, I wasn't buying it. Still, I answered. "Hi, sweetheart," she chirped, her voice so sugary I almost gagged. "We heard you got a house. That's such a big step. You must be so proud." "Yeah," I replied cautiously. "What do you want?" The fake cheerfulness vanished like smoke. "Well, your father and I are in a bit of a bind. You know how things have been tough for Melissa lately." I already knew where this was going, but I let her continue. "And we had to help her out. It's been really hard on us financially, and we're losing the house. We were thinking, since you've got all that space, maybe we could stay with you for a while, just until we get back on our feet." There it was. The audacity. The absolute gall. After everything they'd done, kicking me out, abandoning me, ignoring me for years, they actually thought I'd just open my doors to them? "No," I said flatly. She gasped like I'd slapped her. "But we're family!" "Were we family when you dumped me on Grandma?" I snapped. "Were we family when you gave Melissa everything and left me to fend for myself? Sorry, but no. I'm not your backup plan." Her voice turned to ice. "I can't believe you're being so selfish." "Grandma raised me," I corrected. "And I'm not giving you a damn thing." I hung up, shaking with anger. But it didn't stop there. Part 4. The Guilt Trip Express. Over the next few days, the guilt trip texts started rolling in. My dad sent me a novel-length message about how they'd sacrificed so much for me, how I was turning my back on my own blood. Melissa even had the audacity to chime in, calling me pathetic for letting our parents suffer. This, coming from the woman who caused the entire mess in the first place. See? Melissa's house, the one my parents bought for her, foreclosed. Because she maxed out her credit cards trying to live like some Instagram influencer. When that house of cards came crashing down, she ran crying to Mom and Dad, who drained their savings to bail her out. But it wasn't enough. Now they were broke, losing their own home, and Melissa was back living with them, still mooching off whatever scraps they had left. Meanwhile, Grandma and I were actually thriving. I got a better job soon after moving, which meant I could start putting money into upgrades for the house. Even with Grandma's nurse bills stacking up, we made it work. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. But of course, my parents couldn't let me have peace. They showed up at the house one afternoon, uninvited, banging on the door like they were the cops. When I opened it, my mom immediately tried to push her way inside. "We need to talk," she said, her voice sharp. "No, we don't," I replied, blocking the doorway. "Whatever you're here for, the answer is no." My dad stepped forward, looking angrier than I'd ever seen him. "We're your parents. We gave you everything, and this is how you repay us." "You gave me nothing," I said calmly. "Grandma gave me everything. And this house? It's mine and hers. You're not welcome here." My mom's voice hit a new octave. "This house wouldn't exist without us. You wouldn't exist without us. You owe us." I laughed bitterly. Grandma finally had enough. She came to the door, frail but firm, her voice calm and unwavering. "This is our house," she said, her eyes narrowing at my parents. "And if you don't leave, I'll call the police." That shut them up real quick. They stormed off, muttering under their breath about how ungrateful and selfish I was. A week later, I heard through the grapevine that my parents were telling everyone I'd stolen the house from them. According to their version of events, they'd helped me financially, and I'd cut them out once I got the keys. Which was, of course, complete and utter bullshit. Every dime that went into this house was mine, and the deed with Grandma's name on it proved it. Melissa was still mooching off them, still causing chaos. Apparently, she'd maxed out another credit card, this one co-signed by my dad, and now they were on the hook for even more debt. Their house officially went into foreclosure, and the three of them were crammed into a tiny rental apartment. Meanwhile, I was finally building a life that was mine. Not because of my parents, but in spite of them. Every time I walked through the front door, I was reminded of what real family looked like, and that was worth more than anything they could have ever offered. As for my parents and Melissa, karma has a way of catching up with people. They were stuck in that tiny rental, drowning in debt and drama. And from what I hear, Melissa was already on her third big idea to get rich quick. They'd put all their faith in greed, selfishness, and lies, and now they were reaping exactly what they sowed. Me? I had peace, stability, and the kind of life they'd never understand. Funny how life works, isn't it? Part 5. Vulture's Circle. I thought cutting off my parents and Melissa would be the end of their nonsense. Clearly, I underestimated just how far they'd go. Life settled into a peaceful rhythm for a while, but that peace was shattered when Grandma passed away in her sleep. Losing her left a hole in my heart that I don't think will ever fully heal. But I was determined to honor her by continuing to live the life we built together. I didn't have the luxury of wallowing in grief. She wouldn't have wanted that. And honestly, I owed it to her to keep going. But peace, apparently, is something my parents and Melissa find intolerable. Less than a week after Grandma's funeral, they started circling like vultures. My mom called, putting on her most syrupy sweet voice, the one she uses when she's about to try and manipulate someone. "We just wanted to check on you," she said, fake concern dripping from every word. "It must be so hard losing Grandma. She was such a special lady." I almost laughed. The same people who hadn't visited Grandma in years now wanted to act like grieving saints? Spare me. "I'm fine," I said, keeping my voice flat. "What do you want?" "Well," she said, drawing out the word like she was savoring it. "Your father and I have been talking, and we think it's time to come together as a family. You know, Grandma's house could be a fresh start for all of us." There it was, the real reason for the call. I didn't even let her finish her pitch before hanging up. They didn't waste any time making their next move. A certified letter showed up a few days later. My parents were suing me. Their claim, Since Grandma's name was on the deed, half the house was part of her estate, and they were entitled to that share as her next of kin. Never mind that I'd paid for the house with my own money. Never mind that I'd put Grandma on the deed as an honor, not because she contributed financially. It didn't matter to them. They saw an opportunity and latched onto it like parasites. I wasn't about to roll over and let them take what was mine. I called Alyssa, my lawyer. She reviewed the letter and explained that while their argument wasn't airtight, it wasn't completely baseless either. Technically, with Grandma's name on the deed, they could argue that her share was part of her estate. It didn't mean they were right, but it did mean we'd have to fight. They're grasping at straws, Alyssa assured me, but we'll need to be thorough. This could get messy. The first step in the legal process was discovery, which basically meant both sides had to gather and exchange all the evidence they had. I handed over everything. Bank statements showing I'd made every payment on the house, emails with the real estate agent, even texts with Grandma where we talked about putting her name on the deed as a symbolic gesture. Alyssa said it was airtight. My parents, on the other hand, decided to get creative. Their lawyer, this smug guy with slicked back hair and a bad suit, argued that since Grandma's name was on the deed, it was proof that she had a financial stake in the house. They even dug up old family photos of Grandma sitting on the porch or helping me plant flowers in the yard, claiming it was evidence that she was a co-owner. The audacity didn't stop there. They tried to twist the fact that I'd hired a nurse for Grandma in her final months into an argument that I was managing her share of the property. According to them, my paying for her care wasn't an act of love, it was some kind of financial arrangement. I couldn't believe the lengths they were going to paint me as the bad guy. Alyssa wasn't fazed. "Let them dig their hole," she said. "The more ridiculous their claims, the easier it'll be to dismantle them in court." Part 6. Justice Prevails. While the legal process crawled forward, my parents and Melissa launched a full-on smear campaign. Melissa, true to form, took to social media with her crocodile tears. She posted some long, dramatic rant about how I was stealing the family home and leaving my poor, helpless parents homeless. The comments were filled with sympathy from people who had no idea what the real story was. Stuff like, "How could he do this to his own family?" and "Blood is thicker than water." It would have been laughable if it wasn't so infuriating. These were the same people who had kicked me out as a teenager, who hadn't even visited Grandma while she was sick, and now they wanted to play the victims. The hypocrisy was almost impressive. What really got me was the way they dragged Grandma into it. My parents started telling anyone who would listen that I'd manipulated her into signing over the house. They painted me as some kind of greedy, conniving grandson who'd taken advantage of a frail old woman. It was disgusting. I didn't engage, though. I knew getting into a public back and forth would just add fuel to their fire. Instead, I focused on gathering more evidence to prove my case. Before we could head to court, the judge ordered us into mediation. Apparently, it's standard procedure to try and resolve disputes outside of court. I wasn't optimistic, but Alyssa said it was worth going through the motions. The mediator was this exhausted-looking woman who clearly dealt with family drama for a living. She started by asking if there was any way we could come to an agreement. My mom immediately launched into her pity act, talking about how they were struggling and how it was only fair that they get half the house. "Fair would have been treating me like a human being when I was a kid," I said, my voice tight with anger. "Fair would have been not abandoning me when I needed you the most. You don't deserve a dime." My dad tried to step in, puffing himself up like he was going to intimidate me. "We're your parents," he said, his voice low and threatening. "We gave you life. You owe us." "I owe you nothing," I snapped. "You made your choices, now live with them." The mediator tried to smooth things over, suggesting a compromise where I'd buy out their share of the house. I laughed out loud. "Not happening," I said. "I'm not paying them for something they never earned." After hours of going in circles, it was clear mediation wasn't going to work. The case was heading to trial, and I was ready for whatever they threw at me. The day of the trial finally arrived, and I was ready to put an end to this circus. My parents and Melissa showed up looking like they were auditioning for a daytime courtroom drama. They thought they had this in the bag. Meanwhile, I walked in with Alyssa, my lawyer, who looked calm and confident as ever. If there's one thing I learned from this whole mess, it's that having someone confident in your corner makes all the difference. Alyssa had been working tirelessly to build our case, and I trusted her completely. The room was packed with people who'd heard about the case thanks to Melissa's social media antics. I recognized a few faces: old neighbors, distant relatives, even a couple of my co-workers. It was surreal seeing my life put on display like this, but I kept my focus on the one thing that mattered: proving the truth. Their lawyer started with a dramatic opening statement. He painted my parents as devoted family members who had been wronged by a greedy son. He leaned heavily on the fact that Grandma's name was on the deed, claiming it was irrefutable proof that she co-owned the house. I rolled my eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck. This guy was laying it on thick, and I could tell the judge wasn't impressed. She sat there with a no-nonsense expression, her pen tapping against the desk as if she couldn't wait for him to wrap it up. The bulk of the trial was spent going through evidence. Alyssa presented everything we had: the bank statements showing every mortgage payment came from my account, the email chain with the real estate agent confirming the purchase details, and even Grandma's will, which didn't mention the house at all because she knew it wasn't hers to leave. Their lawyer tried to poke holes in the evidence, but it was like watching someone throw pebbles at a brick wall. He kept coming back to the same argument. The name on the deed proves co-ownership. Alyssa was ready for this. She brought in a real estate expert to testify that a name on a deed doesn't necessarily indicate financial contribution or ownership. It can be symbolic, the expert explained. It's not uncommon for people to add loved ones to deeds as a gesture of trust or security, especially in close-knit families. It was a devastating blow to their case. She then addressed the judge directly. Your Honor, this isn't a case of shared ownership. It's a case of one family trying to exploit a technicality for financial gain. The most satisfying part of the trial was watching Alyssa cross-examine my mom. My mom had come prepared with her usual crocodile tears, but Alyssa wasn't having it. Can you tell the court how much money you or your husband contributed to the purchase of this house? Alyssa began, her tone polite but firm. My mom hesitated, her face turning red. Well, we didn't contribute financially, but that's not the point. It was always understood that this house was part of the family, she stammered, trying to pivot. Understood by whom? Alyssa pressed. Because we've seen no evidence to suggest that my client ever agreed to this arrangement. My mom stammered, trying to regain her footing. We're his parents. We raised him. Isn't that enough? Alyssa didn't miss a beat. This isn't about parenting, it's about property ownership. If you didn't contribute financially and there's no written agreement supporting your claim, how do you justify your demand for half of this house? My mom had no answer. She looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. After several days of testimony and evidence, it was finally time for the judge to make her ruling. She started by acknowledging the emotional nature of the case, but emphasized that her decision would be based on facts, not feelings. The evidence is clear, she said. While the name on the deed might suggest co-ownership at a glance, the financial records tell a different story. The plaintiff paid for this property in its entirety. The inclusion of his grandmother's name on the deed was a symbolic gesture, not a financial agreement. As such, the defendants have no legal claim to this house. Hearing those words felt like a weight had been lifted off my chest. The house was mine. Officially, undeniably mine. After the ruling, my parents tried to guilt-trip me one last time. My mom cornered me in the parking lot, tears streaming down her face. How could you do this to us? She sobbed. We're your parents. We're struggling. You've been struggling for years, I said coldly, and it's not my problem. You made your bed, now lie in it. She didn't have a response to that. Since then, I've gone completely no contact. They've tried reaching out through mutual acquaintances, but I shut it down every time. And from what I hear, my parents are stuck in their tiny rental, still blaming everyone but themselves for their problems. Me, I'm finally free. I have a home, a life, and peace of mind. And that's something they can never take away from me. Story 2. My mother-in-law moved into my home, made new regulations, and even tossed away my brother's ashes, according to the title of this story. She wants to see my child now that I'm pregnant, even though I booted her out. Hello, everyone! Prior to starting today's video, I need your assistance. One of the greatest ways you can help us out is to subscribe, since we've observed the channel is losing some of its popularity. It's simple, free, and helps us continue to provide you with amazing content. Your assistance is much appreciated. Together, let's continue to build this channel. Many thanks. Let's begin the video now. Have you ever encountered someone who, before you even speak, declares their hatred for you? That's Linda, a 53-year-old woman, my mother-in-law. I sensed her coldness as soon as I entered her home. Oh, you don't look like the son I imagined you to be. To be honest, I should have fled at that moment, but instead, I stayed, made an effort to be kind. I'm here to tell you how desperate Linda was to ruin my life, and how I ensured that she would never do it again. Linda has been at this game from day one, so don't assume she hates me now. The moment Ryan took me home to meet her, she began to dislike me. I am Priya, a 28-year-old Indian-American woman who grew up in Chicago. For Linda, I may as well have just stepped off the boat, even though my family has been here for 4 generations. She is the kind of lady who feels her son should have a white girl who is chaste, pious, and attends church. I wasn't any of it. I met a 28-year-old man named Ryan in college. He was the affable, all-American man with the warm eyes and easy chuckle. In addition, I was the girl who could argue with anyone. We clicked right away, and we fell in love quickly after. I was anxious but hopeful when Ryan decided it was time for me to meet his mother. Although I was aware that his family was from a tiny town, I foolishly thought they would recognize me as a dedicated, caring mother who loved their kid. I was mistaken as soon as I entered her home. Although Linda was kind, her manner was cold, phony, and each phrase seemed like a test. "Oh," she replied, smiling a bit too tightly. "You're Priya. I've heard a little bit about you from Ryan. It seemed like a code for all the things I dislike about you. In any case, I tried to create a good impression by smiling." That evening's dinner was a disaster straight out of a romantic comedy. Linda asked me a lot of questions regarding my past. What are your parents up to? They have a modest company, I see. It must be pleasant. Will you be going home frequently? At home? She pretended that I hadn't said anything when I informed her that I was born here. The remarks about the cuisine followed. Linda had prepared a tasteless roast with boiling green beans and mashed potatoes. I asked for salt nicely, yet it seemed like I smacked her face. "Do you think it lacks enough flavor?" With a tone brimming with subtle hostility, she inquired. Ryan immediately defended me by claiming that my mother was just accustomed to other types of meals. Although she doesn't provide criticism, Linda wasn't finished. "You used to love this meal when Becky made it for you," she continued, turning to face Ryan. Becky was who the devil. It found out that Ryan's high school love was Becky. Blonde and vivacious, she was the ideal daughter-in-law for Linda. Becky was already married when I first met Linda. Despite this, Linda continued to treat her as though she were still a member of the family. Linda kept bringing her up. According to Becky, she just sent me the cutest card for my birthday. At the grocery store, I ran into Becky. "Tell you," she said. "Hello, Ryan." I initially dismissed it. Linda's obsession with Becky wasn't her fault. However, Linda then began to test limits. When Ryan and I were engaged, Becky texted him one day. It was sufficiently innocent. She was seeking guidance on a project at work, but I couldn't help but suspect Linda was involved. Ryan was unconcerned, but I knew Linda. She was plotting. Everything was revealed a week later. "Over dinner," Linda noted in passing. "Oh, Ryan, I gave your number to Becky. I assumed you wouldn't mind because she mentioned that she wanted assistance." I was enraged. "You had no right to do that, Linda," I said, attempting to seem calm. Linda pretended to be innocent as she blinked at me. "What's so important? Becky is almost like family. She is not related." "Firmly," Ryan said. "Furthermore, you must consult Priya and me before making decisions like that." Linda sighed and shifted the conversation, but the harm had already been done. It was about control, not just about Becky. The fact that Ryan was choose me over the life she had envisioned for him infuriated Linda. Linda didn't even act pleased when Ryan proposed. We didn't get a call from her congratulating us, never inquired about the ring, refused to assist with the wedding. Rather, she ignored our calls and pouted for weeks. She attempted to dissuade Ryan from marrying me when she did speak with him at last. She remarked, "You're hurrying into this. Getting married is a major step. Have you given it enough thought?" Ryan would have none of it. "I adore Priya, Mom. We're getting married. You have the option to sit or participate. This one is out." Linda grudgingly consented to attend our engagement celebration, but she was obviously unable to act appropriately. She arrived late wearing black? Black indeed. She talked to her cousins all evening about how different the wedding will be, as if she were in mourning. I heard her say to one of her pals, "I just hope Ryan knows what he's doing," at one point. It might be challenging to marry someone from such a different cultural background. I was prepared for everything Linda might throw at me by the time the wedding arrived, or so I believed. Everything was a scene for her. The cuisine, the music, and the guest list. "Does the reception really need to serve Indian food?" she questioned Ryan. "Shouldn't we just serve something neutral, like potatoes and steak?" Quickly shut that down, Ryan. This is also Priya's wedding, Mom. Finally, we are enjoying Indian cuisine on the wedding day itself. By dressing in a lavish black gown that seemed more appropriate for a movie premiere than a family wedding, Linda attempted to outdo me. In the pictures, she declined to grin, left the reception early without saying farewell, and hardly spoke to my parents. Even though it stung, I'm not going to let her spoil my day. The only thing that mattered was that Ryan and I were married. After 3 years, I believed that the worst of it was behind us. Ryan and I had learnt to ignore Linda's passive-aggressive remarks, but she still made them every time she came to visit. Together, we were creating a nice life in our little house. Then there was the turmoil surrounding Linda's condo HOA. She had apparently been at odds with her neighbors for months. Something regarding fence heights and property lines. One day, sobbing, she contacted Ryan and asked for a place to stay until she worked things out. Since Ryan is a good-hearted person, he volunteered to let her move in for a short time, while she looks for another apartment. "I know it's a lot to ask, but she's my mom," he remarked. I let out a groan, already fearing what lay ahead. "Okay, but Ryan, you have to establish limits. This is not her house, it's ours." He said he would, but it's easy to make promises. Retaining them, that is a whole other matter. I knew I was in danger when Linda arrived at our house. She had already interrupted my life with her views and sense of entitlement. However, this was not like the others. She wasn't simply stopping by this time. She was relocating. Like she was getting ready for a year-long trip, her van was crammed full with boxes, bags, and other home belongings. I moaned as I peered out the window. "Tell me, Ryan, she didn't bring her whole house." Already frustrated, Ryan massaged his temples. I assured her that it was only temporary. Like she always does, she's most likely just packing too much, either temporary or not. This seemed like the start of a bad dream. As like she owned the place, Linda walked in with ease. Her gaze lingered a little too long on my baggy hoodie and leggings as she gave me a once-over. "Oh, you appear at ease, Priya." Her voice brimmed with condemnation as she spoke. "It's good to see you, Linda." I forced a grin in response. Ryan assisted her in carrying her belongings, which included 6 large suitcases, 3 fragile boxes, and a laundry basket with blankets and throw cushions. She started looking about the house right away, as if she were doing a real estate evaluation. She ran her fingers over the back of the couch and said, "You've changed the furniture since I was last here." "It's contemporary. Although it's not really my style, I suppose it suits you as well. It works." I resisted the impulse to roll my eyes as I spoke. Then she walked into the kitchen and opened drawers and cabinets without asking. "You still have that spice rack, Priya. It's really time for you to obtain something more impartial. This one is blatantly ethnic." With clenched teeth, I answered, "Because it's mine." Ryan gave me a pitying glance, but Linda didn't notice. She was too busy moving things around in my kitchen. I escorted Linda to the guest room we had set up for her after she had completed her tour of the home. With a full-sized bed, clean sheets, and a tiny desk near the window, it was compact but comfortable. "It's this." She wrinkled her nose and inquired, "This is the guest room indeed. I answered. She entered, making a leisurely round as if she were inspecting a cell in a prison. It's really little. Are you certain there isn't anything larger? There isn't another room available, I remarked, attempting to seem neutral. How about the workplace? Pointing down the hallway, she questioned. I strongly said that we operate in the office, which is far smaller than this place. With a theatrical sigh, she collapsed on the bed. I'll have to get a nicer mattress, but I guess I'll get by. This is really too rigid. I said that the mattress was brand new. I'm getting tired of guests, she retorted. Not for a long-term resident. Short-term. She was corrected by Ryan. Mom, you're only here for a while. She disregarded him. It became evident in a matter of hours that Linda would not simply settle in peace. She began unpacking right away, putting so many of her belongings in the guest room that it appeared as though she was establishing a permanent home. She brought in a little coffee machine since evidently walking to the kitchen was too cumbersome, strung up her own drapes, and changed the bedding I had put out with her own more comfy set. However, it didn't end there. It was a habit of Linda's to treat each room as though it were her own. She would leave her mail on the kitchen counter, her shoes in the hallway, and her coffee cup on the table in the living room. She seemed to be demarcating her area. She was moving the framed pictures on our bookshelves when I walked downstairs one evening. She had shifted a wedding day photo of Ryan and me to the back of the shelf and swapped it out with a prom picture of Ryan and Becky from high school. What are you doing, Linda? My voice was hardly steady as I asked. Oh, she answered with an innocent smile. I was just cleaning up. Don't you think this photo of Ryan and Becky is much better? I grabbed the picture and shoved it back into the drawer where it belonged, saying, No, I don't. Our wedding pictures remain in their current location. Linda sighed as though I were the one who was being unreasonable. Priya, you're really sensitive. It's only an image. This is my house, I yelled. Almost instantly, the kitchen turned into a battlefield. My passion has always been cooking, and Ryan adores the food I make. She had an issue with everything I created, though, Linda. Are you cooking again, Priya? One evening, she wrinkled her nose at the scent of coriander and cumin. The scent of spices permeates the entire home. Dinner smells in the air. As I stirred the curry pot on the burner, I spoke. Well, she responded, perhaps you could open a window next time. These odors shouldn't stick to the walls. When Ryan heard, he intervened. Priya's food is fantastic, Mom. You can refuse to eat it if you don't like it. Linda appeared irritated as she crossed her arms. All I'm trying to say is, Ryan, I'm not sure how you can cope with all that heat. Your stomach has always been so sensitive. I don't, Ryan stated emphatically. Linda wasn't finished, though. She began recommending simpler dishes. Reed may be blanded by me. How about preparing a simple dish like meatloaf? Or a lovely dish, perhaps. Becky used to make them, and Ryan loved them. Once more, it was there. Becky. Despite all these years, Linda was unable to stop talking about Becky. She seemed to believe that Ryan would miraculously alter his attitude about me if she talked about her enough. I was baking one day when Linda entered the kitchen while Ryan was away. Leaning on the counter, she added nonchalantly, I saw Becky the other day. I responded, not looking up from the dough. Good for her. I was kneading. She's doing great, Linda said. She just received a raise at work, and she said that she still occasionally thinks about Ryan. I stopped in mid-knead and froze my hands. Linda, what are you trying to say? Oh, nothing, she answered in an unduly pleasant voice. I simply find it admirable that she still has feelings for him. You know, she played such a significant role in his life. I turned to her after dropping the dough onto the counter. Linda, I'm married to Ryan. Becky is married as well. She has never been and never will be a part of his life. Therefore, don't bother if you're intending to stir up trouble. After a brief moment of hesitation, Linda's smile returned. Why you're being so defensive is beyond me. I'm simply thinking back on that evening. I told Ryan everything. He was enraged. She mentioned Becky once more. With his mouth clenched, he asked, She did, of course. She has been attempting to discredit me ever since she arrived, I said. I will speak with her. Ryan said he would. This is going too far. However, talking was insufficient. I was beginning to feel alienated in my own house as Linda dug her claws in. It felt like forever, even though Linda had only been living with us for a few days. Although I was aware that things would worsen before they improved, I was unaware of the extent to which she would go to undermine me. I was already on the verge of going insane when Linda made the decision to ruin my cupboard. With her, there was a new insult or passive-aggressive remark every day. She treated me like an inexperienced cleaner who had inadvertently entered her son's life and my house like a badly run hotel. Nevertheless, I made an effort to maintain harmony for Ryan's sake. I reminded myself that it was just temporary and that she would soon grow bored and go. However, what transpired that morning made it quite evident. Linda wasn't only challenging, her goal was to completely destroy me. I felt abnormally hopeful when I woke up. Ryan loves biryani, so I was going to cook it for supper. Additionally, I had spent the previous evening marinating the chicken and preparing the seasonings. I always felt in control while I was cooking, and I needed that little win because of Linda's continual shenanigans. However, my heart fell when I entered the kitchen. All my neatly arranged shelves were empty, and the pantry door was ajar. I initially believed I was seeing things. I massaged my eyes, blinked, and opened the cabinet once again in the hopes that the spices would come out of thin air. They didn't. I've lost my rice dispenser. I kept the sacks of wheat, the jars of lentils, and even the tiny jars of dried herbs for special occasions. It was all gone. I examined the refrigerator in panic. The tale was the same. I had stocked up on veggies, yogurt, and paneer, but it was all gone. A loaf of bread, some eggs, a stick of butter, and a carton of milk were all that remained. The realization struck me, and I stood still. My kitchen had been wiped out. A few minutes later, still half sleeping, Ryan walked into the kitchen. "Good morning," he stated as he picked up a coffee mug. "Are you all right? You appear pallid. The food is all gone." My voice trembled as I asked. Ryan scowled while examining the refrigerator and pantry. "I don't know. Was it moved before I could respond?" With her coffee cup in hand, Linda entered the room as if she hadn't already broken into my pantry. She grinned as she glanced at Ryan and then at me. "Oh, you noticed," she murmured, as if she were anticipating appreciation. "Have you noticed anything? I lost my temper. I tidied up the kitchen." Putting down her cup, she spoke. "Everything you had, including those strange spices and other items. It simply wasn't appropriate. That type of meal is unfamiliar to Ryan. I decided it was time to make a new beginning." Ryan's mouth fell open. "What did you do?" Linda gave a shrug. I tossed it aside. In addition to taking up a lot of room, the scent was rather overwhelming. "You may now buy regular groceries." "Typical groceries," I said, raising my voice. "That was food worth hundreds of dollars, Linda." "How long did it take me to stock all of that, do you know?" Not even Linda flinched. "Oh, Priya, stop being so theatrical. More can be purchased? In addition, I've already compiled a list of the goods we truly require. Chicken breasts, canned soup, and potatoes. Real food, you know?" Ryan interrupted, his tone piercing. "You had no right to handle any of that, Mom. Priya's kitchen is this. What were you contemplating?" "I was considering your well-being." With her arms crossed, she spoke. "Those spices, all of them. What they're doing to your gut is unknown. All I'm doing is watching out for you." "You're not," Ryan retorted. "Again, you're treating Priya disrespectfully." However, Linda wasn't paying attention. In this case, she had already determined that she was the victim, and she was not going to change her mind no matter what we said. Linda confessed, and I raced out of the home. I instructed Ryan to stay and deal with his mother, even though he offered to accompany me to the grocery shop. To be honest, I didn't trust myself to be polite to her at that moment, so I needed to calm down. My mood didn't get any better at the grocery shop. My aggravation grew as I made my way down the aisles. None of the spices, lentils, or bags of basmati rice were present. Linda had thrown some out, and I had to replace them. Even if canned groceries and frozen dinners were plenty on the stores, things weren't the same. The fact that some of those things were irreplaceable just made it worse. I couldn't just buy several of the ingredients Linda had thrown out at the neighborhood grocery store. During my parents' and friends' visits from India, I received the majority of the masala dry herbs and specialty foods. Every time my mother visited, she brought a care package for me. packed with pickles, dried red chilies, and handmade spice mixes. I was unable to locate it. They were more than simply food. They represented fragments of home, little reminders of my origins, even though I was able to locate several Indian components nearby. Every time, it was a pain. The closest Indian supermarket was more than an hour distant, and their inventory fluctuated. I occasionally make the long commute just to discover that they are out of asafoetida or turmeric. Additionally, I had to rely on internet retailers when I was unable to travel, which came with expensive shipping costs and the uncertainty of whether the things would arrive fresh. My mom sent me a little container of garam spice last year, and I pondered about it. It was a spice combination of her own creation. She ground herself and toasted. Like a can of paprika, Linda had most likely thrown it in the garbage without giving it any attention. It was more than simply an ingredient in the container. My mother gave it to me as a present. She knew I couldn't duplicate it here, so she crafted it with love. As I pushed my cart through the store, I could feel my throat constricted. How could someone have such a lack of consideration? Was Linda even aware of the damage she caused? Or did she simply not give a damn? I took hold of what I could. A loaf of bread, some spaghetti, and canned tomatoes. However, it was very different from the colorful, tasty dishes I was accustomed to preparing. It seemed more than simply a hassle when my go-to items were not available. I felt as though a piece of myself had been removed. Linda was reading a magazine on the couch when I arrived home. As I passed her carrying the groceries, she didn't even raise her head. "Have you gotten all you require?" In a casual manner, she questioned, as if she hadn't just destroyed my kitchen. "No," I responded bluntly. "You'll manage, I'm sure." As she turned a page, she said, "You're resourceful." I walked upstairs to cool up after slamming the pantry door. Ryan and I had a conversation that evening. He could see she needed to go, and I was still furious. "Without trying to sugarcoat things," I said. With a groan, Ryan combed through his hair. "I am aware that what she did was totally inappropriate, Priya. It's unacceptable. I've told her already. The groceries aren't the only thing at stake." My voice trembled as I spoke. "Ryan, she doesn't respect me. She has been upfront about it from the beginning, and now she is acting as though I am a visitor in my own house." Ryan gave a nod. "You're correct. She has gone too far too often. Tomorrow, I'll give Lisa a call to see if she can take her in." Lisa, a woman of 32. Linda had been invited to stay with his sister when the whole thing began. However, Linda had declined. "My buddies are too far away." "At the time," she had stated. "She can't remain here then." I spoke aggressively. "Not after this." Ryan sat Linda down for a serious conversation the next morning. In order to avoid being involved in the dispute, I remained upstairs. I was able to hear some of what they were saying, but not all of it. "Mom, you can't simply discard someone else's meal. It's not your home. You must be mindful of our personal space. You'll have to go if you can't." With each phrase, Linda's voice became louder. "I was only attempting to assist," she yelled. "And you're kicking me out now, following everything that I have done for you." Ryan remained composed yet resolute. "Mom, we won't toss you out. Lisa has already expressed her happiness in having you. There is no question about it." Linda was furious at the conclusion of the talk. She shut the door to her bedroom and stayed inside the remainder of the day. Ryan and I sat down to a straightforward supper of canned soup and spaghetti that evening. It was sufficient, even if it wasn't what I had intended. Ryan reached for my hand and murmured, "I'm sorry you had to deal with this. I swear that this won't occur once again." I gave a nod. Although I was appreciative of his help, I knew deep down that Linda wouldn't pass away peacefully. She didn't. To put it mildly, the days ahead would be fascinating. Linda had more than simply entitlement. She was vindictive. What started off as a furious assault of my kitchen turned into something I never imagined even she could do. I was exhausted from the pantry incident, but I made an effort to overlook it for Ryan's sake. Then, a few days later, something occurred that completely altered the situation. In our living room, I had a little, exquisitely carved wooden box on the mantel. It held the ashes of my older brother, Arjun, who died 5 years ago in a vehicle accident. The most difficult thing my family and I had ever gone through was losing him, and it was comforting to have that little bit of him around me. Though basic, the box held great meaning for me. My parents had given it to me as a token of their appreciation for Arjun. They had given me some of his ashes to keep near, as they knew I couldn't regularly visit his grave. I discovered the box was missing one evening while cleaning the living room. Thinking it could have been pushed aside, I looked at the mantel, but it wasn't there. I started to panic as I looked on the coffee table, the bookshelf, and even the floor. "Ryan!" With a trembling voice, I shouted out, "The box is where?" "The mantel-mounted one." Ryan frowned as he entered the room. "Which box?" "The one that contained Arjun's ashes," I said. My heart is racing. His expression dropped. "I'm not sure. It ought to be present." Linda entered at that moment, drinking her tea nonchalantly. Why all the commotion? With a very unimpressed expression, she questioned. "There is no box containing my brother's ashes." I turned to her and spoke. "Did you see it?" Her face remained unchanged. "That old stuff, huh? I assumed it was some sort of ornamental item. While dusting, I relocated it. Perhaps one of the drawers contains it. I looked in every drawer, shelf, every nook and cranny of the space. Nothing. Linda." My voice shook with rage as I spoke. "What location is it? This goes beyond just adornment. It's the ashes of my brother. If it was moved, tell me the location." She pretended to be innocent as she stared at me. "Really, Priya, I have no idea. Perhaps you lost it." "Lost it?" I said it again, raising my voice. "Linda, nothing was lost by me. It's gone now, but it was on the mantel. Have you thrown it away?" She put on her phony grin after her face stiffened for a while. "Why would I do that? It's really theatrical of you. It will appear somewhere, I'm sure." However, it didn't. I had trouble sleeping that night. Nothing Ryan said could make up for what had been lost, despite his best efforts to console me. I had a visceral feeling that Linda had thrown the package away out of malice. Her attempts to eradicate my cuisine and customs were insufficient. She desired to remove me from existence. Ryan addressed her mother the following morning. "Have you disposed of the ashes of Priya's brother?" Linda let out a gasp and clenched her chest as if the idea were offensive. "How could you say such a terrible thing about me? I would never act in that way. So where is it?" Ryan applied pressure. "I'm not sure. She lost her temper. Priya may not have as excellent of a recall as she believes. The last straw for us both was her unwillingness to confess." Ryan and I had a conversation that evening. I had never seen him so furious. "I know she did it, Priya. I know she must go, but she will never acknowledge it." I spoke aggressively. "I can't live like this, Ryan. Someone who disrespects me is not someone I can live with. My family, my culture, someone who would ruin something that valuable." Ryan gave a nod. "She is no longer there. Tomorrow, I'll give Lisa a call and tell her to come collect Mom. If she declines to visit Lisa, we'll figure something other out. She's not going to remain here, though. One more day." The news did not sit well with Linda. In an attempt to guilt-trip him by bringing up his early years, she said that we had abandoned her and were unappreciative of everything she had done for Ryan. Ryan, however, remained steadfast. "Mom, you've gone too far," he remarked. "Family is no longer the focus of this. Respect is at issue, and you haven't displayed any. By the end of the week, you must depart." Linda had left. In an effort to get rid of the stress and poison she had brought with her, Ryan and I cleaned the house for hours. However, her acts had left scars, even if she was no longer physically present. I was troubled by the loss of my brother's ashes. Each time I passed the mantel, I had a pain in my chest. Ryan did everything he could to comfort me, but nothing could repair the harm Linda had done. The day Linda left our home, she moved in with Ryan's sister, Lisa. God bless her, Lisa didn't know what she was getting herself into. She had heard tidbits of what had transpired, but she thought it was just normal family drama. She was not yet aware of the extent of Linda's avarice and hatred. We didn't hear from Linda at first. No attempts to get in touch, no texts, no calls. I felt a sense of relief. I didn't want to listen to her make-believe or justifications, but I knew Linda too. She didn't like to be silent. She was too arrogant to remain silent indefinitely, but she was also too obstinate to acknowledge her mistakes. We received a call around 2 weeks after Linda and Lisa moved in together, but it wasn't from Linda. Lisa sent it. "Can I speak with you, Priya?" Lisa sounded uncertain, as if she wasn't sure how to start. "Of course. I said. My heart is sinking. After a lengthy silence, Lisa resumed her conversation. I believe you should know what Mom told me. I prepared myself. What is it? She acknowledged that she had thrown out the box containing your brother's ashes. Lisa spoke haltingly, seeming as though she was having trouble pronouncing the words. I tightened my hold on the phone as I froze. What is she? She claimed to have done it intentionally. Lisa went on, her voice full of disdain. The fact that you and Ryan were forcing her to go disturbed her. She believed that by refusing to let her remain in your house, you were being disrespectful to her. She therefore made the decision to speak up. My palms curled into fists and my heart thumped. In some sort of retaliation, she tossed away my brother's ashes. With each syllable, my voice rose as I begged. Yes, Lisa answered, trembling. After cleaning the cupboard, she informed me, despite her desire to harm you, she claimed to know what the box was. She believed that kicking her out would teach you a lesson. My breath came in short gasps, and I could feel the blood in my veins boiling. Desecrate my brother's remains and teach me a lesson. Could she? How could somebody act in such a horrible way? Lisa's voice broke. I'm not sure, Priya. What's wrong with her is beyond me. I was unable to even look at her when she informed me. She dismissed my comment that she was repulsive as if it were insignificant. She is a monster. My voice trembled with anger as I spoke. Thank you for letting me know, Lisa, but I don't want to ever interact with her again. I think she's dead. Lisa let out a sigh. I get it. In addition, I don't believe she should be pardoned for this. There is no forgiveness for what she did. After saying thank you, I hung up and sat quietly. Linda's brutality was weighing heavily on me. This went beyond simply crossing a queue. It was the height of treachery. Not only had Linda treated me disrespectfully, my sorrow, my culture, and my family were all desecrated by her. There was no way out of this. Slowly, life started to go on. Ryan and I concentrated on repairing our relationship and our house. Eliminating Linda from our life just strengthened us since we were stronger than before. Then, a few months later, an amazing event took place. I discovered I was expecting a child. I was elated at the news, something I hadn't experienced in years. Ryan was overjoyed, and we spoke for hours about nursery designs, baby names, and the types of parents we wanted to be. The future seemed bright for the first time in a long time. At first, we chose to keep the pregnancy a secret. I only told my family and a select group of close friends about the news. I wanted Linda to know nothing, at least not yet. I was prepared for her eventual effort to re-enter our life, but I also knew how she would respond. Sadly, secrets aren't kept that way for very long. Linda somehow learnt of the pregnancy. I don't blame Lisa for letting it slip, but I assume she did so during one of their chats. Linda has a knack for extracting information from others. An email was the first indication of problems. I just received the amazing news. Dear Ryan and Priya, I'm ecstatic to have grandchildren. Tell me how I may be of assistance during this wonderful time, please. I would be delighted to visit and discuss the infant. Mom, love. I didn't reply, therefore I erased the email. Ryan shook his head after reading it over my shoulder. She's incredible, he whispered. The emails evolved into texts, which were followed by phone conversations. Linda tried everything, including playing the victim, apologizing, and guilt trips. In one message, she remarked, "Since I moved out, I've been so lonely. For the baby's sake, can't we simply get over this? After all, I'm still Ryan's mother. However, I couldn't forgive Linda for what she had done. Disrespect was not the only reason I threw away my brother's ashes. That was a horrible deed. I could go on with my life, but I couldn't allow her to re-enter it. Linda's efforts to re-establish contact grew increasingly urgent as my pregnancy went on. Baby clothing, toys, and even a blanket she claimed to have hand-knitted, albeit one that still had the price tag on it, were among the items she sent home. We sent everything back unopened. Linda unexpectedly knocked on our home one evening. I remained hidden in the living room while Ryan responded. "Why have you come here, Mom?" Ryan's voice was icy as he inquired. Linda responded, "I just wanted to see you." "What about Priya and the infant?" "The hump, I suppose." "We don't have you here," Ryan replied firmly. You must go." However, Linda's voice cracked as she continued, "I'm your mother. I can't be excluded from my grandchild's life." Ryan didn't falter. "When you tossed away the ashes of Priya's sibling, you closed yourself off. The final straw was that, 'We're finished.' Mom!" Ryan refused to back down despite Linda's attempts to persuade. She eventually departed, but not before crying. One more instance of guilt tripping. We kept the birth of our daughter, Maya, a secret from Linda. Eventually, she learnt, most likely from Lisa. However, we were aware of our limits at that point. Maya would be raised in a household that valued compassion, love, and respect rather than poison and deceit. Over the years, Linda made a few more attempts to get back in touch, but we never allowed her to. Some injuries are too severe. Furthermore, it's not always feasible to forgive. Rather, we concentrated on creating a life that reflected the principles we held dear. Despite the fact that Maya will never meet her uncle Arjun, I made sure she knew about him as a child. Stories, pictures, and a new box on the mantle, this time with letters and recollections, helped us preserve his memory. A remembrance of the sibling I lost but will always remember. And as I observed Maya's development, I knew we had made the proper decision since we were surrounded by affection and no longer under Linda's shadow. Not all relationships are worth repairing, and sometimes the finest starts are the ends. Story 2. This story is about my stepsister, who moved in with me, became pregnant, and announced that she would be using my room as a nursery. Hello everyone! Prior to starting today's video, I need your assistance. One of the greatest ways you can help us out is to subscribe, since we've observed the channel is losing some of its popularity. It's simple, free, and helps us continue to provide you with amazing content. Your assistance is much appreciated. Together, let's continue to build this channel. Many thanks. Let's begin the video now. Hello everyone! I never imagined that I would be writing something like this, but now that I am at a loss for what to do, I am ranting on Reddit. I am a 21-year-old man who moved into a house that I inherited from my grandma around 2 years ago. It's a respectable 2-story home, and I'm proud of it, even if it's not some enormous estate. Because I looked after Mom in her final days, and she wanted me to have a secure place to live. It was expressly given to me in her will. I rent out rooms to 3 of my buddies, Jack, 19, M. Kim, 18F, and NE, 18F, to assist with expenditures. Kim connected me to NE, who needed a place, and I've known Jack and Kim since high school. Living with them has been easy, and they are lovely people. We've just had a straightforward flatmate dynamic, no drama. To keep everyone in agreement, we divide up the duties, show respect for the house, and have brief monthly meetings. Then there is my stepsister, Susan, who is 22F. Let me begin by stating that I have never been really close to Susan. Susan was already 15 when my dad remarried, and I was 14. She is the daughter of a prior relationship with my stepmother. Although she has always had a slight sense of entitlement, we generally got along while sharing a home. After our parents relocated abroad for my dad's work, I believed I would finally be at peace. 3 years ago, when my grandma was still living, I was mistaken. Susan requested a 1-year stay so she could complete her education. My grandma accepted because she enjoyed the concept of having more relatives around, and since she was still in good health at the time. After Susan moved in, things was going well until she stopped going to school. According to her, it was too stressful. But based on what I observed, it was more about meeting her current lover, Mike, at 20:08 a.m. Mike is one of those men who believes he is an expert on everything. He is not exactly the most responsible person and is noisy and opinionated. He has said stuff like that I have heard. Why is college necessary for women? It's a financial waste. And believe me when I say that Susan eats that trash up. My grandmother was not fond of Mike and made it apparent that Susan's arrangement was just temporary. However, Susan stayed, and my granny died shortly after. I first allowed her as I didn't want to deal with any controversy. It seemed like too much to bear, and I was grieving. I assumed it wouldn't be a huge concern because Susan promised to help out and pay the rent. At first, it wasn't. Let's go back 5 months. Susan revealed her pregnancy to us all as she seated us down. I was unsure of how to react to it. I won't judge her decision since, after all, it's her life. However, I was unaware at the time that this infant would end up becoming my issue. She first informed us that she would shortly be moving in with Mike. She stated that she wouldn't be staying here for very long and that they were looking at flats together. To be honest, I thought that was fantastic for her. Mike could finally take charge and be the responsible boyfriend she claims he is, and she would have a place of her own to raise the child. However, when the weeks stretched into months, nothing changed. Although Mike still lives in his rundown flat, it seems to be too tiny for a baby, and they are unable to buy a larger one. Susan, meantime, began behaving as though my house had suddenly become her home. The adjustments were minor at first. She began bringing strollers, cribs, and mountains of baby things home and simply piled them in her room. She has that space. I thus didn't give a damn. I became anxious, though, when she began discussing baby-proofing the house. Admittedly, I didn't immediately shut her down. Okay, I reasoned, it's not a huge issue to make the house safer. At one of our monthly meetings, we would discuss it and come up with a reasonable approach. Susan, however, wasn't anticipating that. She began to redecorate. Suddenly, one day when I got home, I noticed these cheap turtle figurines on the hallway shelf and some ugly flowered drapes hanging in the living room. I was calm yet irritated. After removing them, I silently returned everything to Susan's room. I informed her that although I valued her efforts to make the house cozy, she wasn't allowed to change in the common spaces. She lost it, I guess. She began to shout at me for being unsupportive and domineering. She described the residence as stuffy and reminiscent of an elderly woman's home. Yes, my granny lived there. I wanted the common areas to remain the same, but I reminded her that she was free to design her own room whatever she pleased. The worst part is still to come. Then she requested permission to paint her room orange. No, I told her. I don't want the walls damaged since, first of all, the house belongs to me. Second, I can't just let everyone paint their rooms any way they choose since I rent to other people. Susan lost it. She rushed out, blaming her outburst on hormones. After that, however, things became icy. Susan continued to utter little remarks under her breath throughout the course of the following few weeks. She complained to Mike, who naturally supported her, and all of a sudden I was held responsible for preventing her from adequately preparing for the kid. Mike even had the audacity to accuse me of selfishness, since Susan is expecting a child. I choose to disregard it. She's hormonal and agitated, so she'll settle down, I reasoned. But boy, was I mistaken. Okay, so here is when the spiral began. I wasn't exactly on speaking terms with Susan after the entire redecorating debacle. She mostly ignored me, but when she did communicate, it was usually to whine or make passive-aggressive remarks about how unimportant family is to me. I chose to ignore her and carried on with my work, in the hopes that she would ultimately calm down. Susan knocked on my door one afternoon. Seldom, since she would often just interrupt when she wanted to speak. She requested that we take a seat and engage in meaningful dialogue. Despite my skepticism, I consented. Perhaps, I reasoned, she was at last prepared to speak like an adult. Susan was initially at ease as we sat at the kitchen table. She began by expressing how anxious she is about the impending baby and how unprepared she feels. She talked about how difficult it has been to locate an apartment with Mike and how exorbitant the rent is in our neighborhood. To be honest, I felt sorry for her. I understand that it's a nightmare to have a child when you're unprepared. I've been thinking, and I have a solution that works for everyone, she said. I ought to have anticipated where this would go. I want to move into your room, Susan whispered, leaning forward as if to reveal a great secret. To put things in perspective, my room is the largest in the home and the master bedroom. I utilize the office space that is linked to it for my tiny internet company, which is essentially what I do for a living. Susan clarified that she and the baby truly need the additional room, and the office would be ideal as a nursery. I honestly believe she was kidding, so I looked at her for a moment. She wasn't. I told her directly. No, as though I had just used a foreign language. Susan blinked at me. No, what do you mean? All that room isn't even necessary for you. You are only one individual. I did need the distance, I informed her. I wasn't going to give up my room because I work in the office, just because she made the decision to become a mother. I did not put her in this predicament. She responded, giving me the expression that I was being irrational. However, It makes logic. It benefits everyone. I questioned her about the specific ways it was better for me, because you'll be supporting your sister when she most needs you, she added. I had had enough of being kind by now. She is renting one room, I reminded her. That's all. She has no right to decide who lives in my home. What did she say? However, Jack and Kim don't require their rooms because they are younger than me. After one of them leaves, the infant is welcome to use their room. Why are you acting so self-centeredly? It took me a while to take in what I was hearing. In addition to attempting to seize my room, she was now planning the rooms of other individuals. The level of entitlement was astounding. Since that's not how any of this works, I assured her that Jack and Kim would not be leaving, and even if they did, she would still not be receiving their rooms. Susan broke down in tears now. Large, dramatic tears. It's unbelievable that you're treating me like way. I have nowhere else to go, you know? I told her that she and Mike were already searching for a flat, and that Mike ought to be the one making sacrifices if he truly cared about her and the child. Not me. She lost it at that point. She became irate, accusing me of being cold-hearted and self-centered for failing to support my family at their time of need. She said I put strangers before myself, Kim and Jack, rather than my own stepsister. Remaining composed, I informed her that I would not allow her to coerce me into doing something I didn't want to do. I informed her that she could find another place to live if she didn't like the arrangement, and that this house was my home. She then revealed her trump card, our parents. All right, she murmured, getting up and wiping her face. I'll speak with Mom and Dad. They will undoubtedly concur that you are acting in a very irrational manner. I didn't answer. I just closed the door to her room and let her storm out. My phone began to explode a few hours later. My father called. Both of them were obviously on Susan's side while my stepmother was texting. When my dad phoned for the third time, I finally answered. Your sister sobbed when she phoned us, he began. Why are you treating her so badly? I made an effort to gently explain the circumstances. Susan wanted to use my room, I informed him. Mike's rude behavior in the past made it impossible for him to move in, and she was acting as though the property was hers. But it didn't sit well with my dad. Son, she's pregnant. She is currently at risk. Why don't you just assist her? You don't require too much room. It's not really important. I was starting to lose patience at this point. I informed him that Susan had no right to make demands because this is my home. Additionally, I informed him that allowing Mike to move in would simply lead to additional issues. Family comes first, my dad stated with a sigh. Always. Her brother is you. You must take the proper action. I was enraged by the term, the right thing. I questioned him. Why do I have to clean up Susan's trash every time? She decided to become pregnant. Instead of coming up with a practical solution, she is opting to remain here. What's wrong with me? After a moment of silence, my father added, I'm disappointed in you. It hurt. I won't tell lies. However, I refused to back down. I informed him that Susan would not be receiving my room and that she and Mike may find another arrangement if they were unhappy with the living arrangement. Before he could answer, I hung up. I felt exhausted after that call. I knew Susan was going to use that as ammunition since my parents were totally on her side. For the remainder of the evening, she remained silent, but I could hear her trash-talking me to Mike on the phone. I discovered a message pinned to my door the next morning. I hope you're happy, it said. You're a self-centered jerk, according to both your parents. I'll be discussing my rights to reside here with a lawyer. Really? Though I was aware of Susan's theatrical tendencies, this was unprecedented. I made the decision to get ahead of things at that moment. I was prepared to play hardball with Susan if she wanted to. I knew I couldn't wait for Susan to do something after she made a big threat to speak with a lawyer. I'm not stupid, but I'm also not a lawyer. She has no legal title to this house, which is mine. Nevertheless, I knew Susan wouldn't let this go unchecked, so I wanted to make sure I covered everything before things got worse. I spoke with my uncle, who is generally calm about such matters. He is familiar with the dynamics of the family and has consistently been one of the few individuals who does not mindlessly support Susan. Just because she weeps about something, my uncle has a close buddy who practices property law, which is fortunate for me. Thus, we scheduled a meeting for the following day. Since Jack and Kim have been enduring this mayhem, I also invited them along for moral support. 2. Annie had work, therefore she was unable to attend. However, she was up to speed and equally frustrated as the rest of us. The elder lawyer seems to have witnessed it all. I gave an explanation of the circumstances, including Susan's month-to-month residency, her desire for my main bedroom, her threats, and everything else. "You have nothing to be concerned about," he continued, sort of sitting back. He explained everything to me in detail. "The house is not legally Susan's. I own it. She lives here on a month-to-month basis, so I can give her enough notice to leave at any moment. Verbal agreements are not legally binding, and she lacks a signed lease." The lawyer added that I could remove her for violating house rules, but I couldn't do so because she was pregnant, something I would never do anyway because I'm not a monster. She broke them, and boy did she. This is when the intriguing part began. At long last, Jack and Kim talked about what Susan had been doing behind my back. Before, they didn't want to stir things up, but now that things had gotten out of hand, they felt that I had to know. First of all, it seemed that Susan had been insulting Jack with homophobic remarks. Susan is aware that Jack is openly homosexual, but she apparently felt it was okay to murmur comments like, "This is a phase," or "Real men don't act like that" every time they meet. It obviously concerned Jack, but he said he didn't want to make a big deal out of it. Subsequently, Kim informed me that Susan had been entering her room without knocking. Susan continued to borrow clothing, food, and makeup without asking. When Susan damaged a load of Kim's clothes, it was the last straw. Given that the garments weren't just jumbled, Kim is very certain Susan did it out of pettiness. They were utterly destroyed. I was already furious, but hearing this made me much more so. Everyone in the home was being treated like a nuisance by Susan. She could go wherever. I was no longer the only one with this issue. My roommates were being impacted, and I wasn't going to put up with it any longer. I asked the lawyer what I needed to do after he informed me that I had every legal right to notify Susan. The important thing, he explained, was to record everything. I thus texted and sent Susan a formal notice as soon as I got home that evening. "Hello, Susan. This is to formally inform you that I will not be extending your month-to-month contract. You have 30 days to plan your departure from the property. I'm available to chat tomorrow if you want to talk about this more. I wasn't attempting to be impolite or hostile. All I wanted was for it to be professional and transparent." I then gave a locksmith a ring. For unconnected reasons, I had previously planned to change the locks. An ex-partner who still possessed a key has some old baggage. I thus reasoned that it would be wise to just lock down the house and increase its security. That same evening, the locksmith arrived and changed the locks on the bedroom and entrance doors. In addition, I had locks installed on the garage and living room doors since I didn't want Mike or Susan to pry where they weren't supposed to. Since her agreement only gives her access to the kitchen, bathroom, and Susan's room, those areas were left available to her. I sent Susan another text just to be safe. For a period. "Hello. To increase security, the locks have been replaced. You may pick up your key now. Tell me when you plan to visit, and I'll see to it that you receive it." No answer. Susan didn't return home that evening. She was with Mike, and I knew it. To be honest, I felt relieved. She may storm into the house and have another tantrum, and I didn't want to deal with it. However, I did receive another call from my father. "What is preventing your sister from entering her house? Are you aware of your unkind behavior?" I told him that Susan wasn't locked out in a calm manner. I had texted her many times to let her know that her key was available for her to pick up. That portion didn't seem to matter to my dad. For heaven's sake, she's pregnant. How can you treat your family with such indifference? I was done debating at this point. I informed him that Susan had 30 days to find another place to go. I have acted in a reasonable manner. She has mistreated me and my housemates, disregarded house rules, and made life here unpleasant. She may try to shame me into it, but I won't allow her to take over my home. I hung up the phone before my dad could finish talking about how important family is and how disappointed he was with me. Nothing else could be said. It's Susan still hasn't arrived to pick up her key a day after everything happened. She's ignoring me even though I've contacted her a few more times to let her know what's accessible. She's likely staying at Mike's and attempting to decide what to do next, based on my assumption. I know there will be a scene when she returns, so I'm not looking forward to it. Susan isn't the kind to leave quietly, and I have no doubt that she is already making up a tale about me being the bad guy to my parents. Here's the problem, though. I've had enough of feeling bad about this. My stepsister is her, not my job. She made her decisions. And because of those decisions, I'm not going to allow her to take advantage of me, my housemates, and my life. I'm ready for whatever that comes up next. I have the lawyer's advice to support me if she wants to stretch this out and keep our parents on her side. Well, anything. I'm certain that what I'm doing is best for my house and myself. Consume. 3 days passed. 3 days of Susan-free bliss when the home was quiet and no one had to put up with her tantrums or her passive-aggressive comments. However, I knew it wouldn't continue long. I could see the storm looming over the home like a black cloud on the evening of the 3rd day, and Susan is not the kind to let things go. Jack and Kim and I were watching TV in the living room when Susan's vehicle pulled into the driveway. We all knew precisely what was going to happen, so the 3 of us exchanged glances. A loud, furious banging followed the rattling of the entrance door. "Are you serious? You swap out the locks. Come on in." Susan's voice may have woken up the whole neighborhood. I took her new key, went to the door, and opened it to see Mike standing behind Susan, looking as arrogant as ever. Susan seemed enraged. She had a red face. She held her tummy theatrically, as if to highlight her pregnancy, and her eyes were crimson. "Your key is here." I held it out to her and spoke as politely as I could. After taking it from me, she pushed by me and entered the home. I moved ahead of Mike as he attempted to follow. "Where are you heading, in your opinion?" I inquired, within the home. His voice was informal, as if he owned the place number. "This is not a place for you," I spoke aggressively. "I still live here." Susan concurred. "Does not give you a call." "God, you're acting so absurdly. He has come to assist me with moving my belongings upstairs. You will force a pregnant lady to do it on her own." I could sense Jack and Kim's unspoken encouragement as they watched from the living room. I knew that he would just remain for a few nights and never go, so I wasn't going to give him the opportunity to get in. "I'll assist you in carrying your belongings," I told her, utterly disregarding Mike. Susan let out a loud groan. "It's impossible of you. This is also our home. You are familiar with our home." In an attempt to keep my calm number, I repeated, "It's my home. This is where you hire a room. You don't get to make the decisions or bring your lover in anytime you want." Susan waved Mike away as she turned back to him. "All right, simply wait in the vehicle. I'll take care of this." Mike whispered something to himself, most likely an insult. However, he departed. In order to prevent another dispute, I prepared to carry Susan's belongings as she rushed up the stairs to her room. When we entered her room, it became clear to him what she had been up to during the last few days. Baby clothing, blankets, bottles, diaper bags, and a cot still in its box were all over the area. Not even half of it had been unloaded. I was unable to stop myself. "You still haven't found a place to reside despite purchasing all of these things." Susan sank into her chair, ignoring me. "I'm still looking with Mike. Finding a location that is both economical and large enough for the infant is difficult." I knew where this was headed, so I inhaled deeply. "You have 30 days, Susan. I warned you. This is something you will have to solve." Her look grew icy as she gazed at me. "Are you aware of how much of a jerk you are? There's plenty of space for you here. I'm related. I'm expecting a child. And you're throwing me out on the street rather than assisting me." "No, you're not being expelled," I said, making an effort to speak evenly. "You have months to solve this problem. You've been arguing with me over paint colors and decorations instead of accomplishing it. I'm not in charge of making this right for you." I swear I thought Susan was going to puke something as she got up. "This residence is not even necessary for you. You are only one individual. Grandma wouldn't approve of you discarding me in this manner." I kinda lost it at that point. Grandma shouldn't be involved in this. She didn't want Mike here, you know? During her lifetime, she forbade you from redecorating. Therefore, don't act as though I'm being irrational. Every bit of goodwill I've given you has been used by you, and I'm finished." Susan sat back down and began to sob uncontrollably. "It's unbelievable how you're treating me. I'm expecting a child. What sort of brother treats his sister like this?" This time, the tears didn't work. I had had enough of feeling bad. "You've got 30 days. I said it again. "I'll assist you move your belongings out if you need it. You're not going to remain here, though. Furthermore, Mike will never move in." Susan didn't answer, but she stomped about the home and slammed doors for the remainder of the evening. They went without saying anything more after Mike returned later to take her up. Because Susan is the kind of person who doesn't give up easily, I could tell she was planning something. My father called later that evening. Susan explained the situation to me. His tone was confrontational from the beginning. She had phoned him, of course. I wasn't shocked at all. "She informed you that she has been demanding my room, treating Jack and Kim like shit, and breaching house rules. Or did she not mention that?" My father let out a sigh. "She is under stress. Son, you should be more understanding because she is pregnant. She's had nowhere else to go, so you're tossing her out. I warned her 30 days in advance." I spoke as calmly as possible. It has taken her a long time to figure this out. I'm not accountable for her. She is an adult. Mike is too. Together, they can resolve this. Your family is hers. He fired back. It is expected of you to support your family. For years, I've been assisting her. I told her that this house was mine and that I would no longer allow her to take advantage of me. After some back and forth, I could see my dad wasn't paying attention. He said he was disappointed and that I was being self-centered as he hung up the phone. After hanging up, I sat for a time in quiet, attempting to take in all the information following Susan's emotional text about speaking with a lawyer. She wasn't feigning to attempt to ruin my life, and I knew it. When she doesn't get her way, she's always been the one to make things worse. Additionally, I knew that things would become nasty with Mike involved. After the last outburst, the home was calm once more 2 days later. Too silent. Kim, Jack, and I were all tense. However, we were making an effort to lead as regular a life as we could. The fact that Susan hadn't returned yet pleased us all. I assumed she was still residing at Mike's and considering her options. I was mistaken. At 7 a.m., on the third morning, Jack knocked on my door, waking me awake. "Mike's here," he muttered, still partly sleeping and with an irritated expression. "He's unloading something in the driveway. He's attempting to move in, I believe." Since I couldn't fathom Mike being that brazen, I initially assumed Jack was kidding. However, he was indeed there, as I peered out the window, hauling a mattress from the rear of his beaten truck as if he were going to camp. I was in complete shock. It nearly made me chuckle. Nearly. I hurried outdoors after grabbing my phone and putting on some clothing. "Do you believe you're accomplishing something?" I approached Mike and made a demand. He gave me the impression that I was the one who was acting inappropriately. "I could move my belongings in," Susan said. "I mean, you didn't really believe you could keep me out." I thought I may blow up because I was so furious. To begin with, this house is not owned by Susan. Yes, I do. Secondly, you are not going to move in. For a period. I'm going to contact the police, so get your belongings and go. Leaning on the mattress as if he had all the time in the world, Mike grinned. "Are you going to report your sister's baby's father to the police?" Good. Very elegant. Just in front of him, I took out my phone and dialed the non-emergency police number. "Observe me." Mike grinned and vanished. "All okay, all right. Relax." He raised his hands in a gesture of simulated submission. "There's no need to be theatrical. For now, I'll go." He muttered abuses to himself as he loaded the mattress back into the truck, and I watched. "This isn't over, dude!" he shouted, slamming the door of his truck after finishing and pointing a finger at me. "It will come back to haunt you since you are destroying your own family." I paid him no attention. Someone who believed it was a good idea to threaten me was not someone I was going to debate with. Until he eventually drove away, I remained outdoors. Jack, who had been standing close to the porch the entire time, whistled softly. Jack remarked, "I didn't think he'd actually try to pull that." What on earth was he thinking? I said, "To be honest, I don't think he was thinking." Most likely, he believed he could simply intimidate his way in. As usual, Susan texted me an hour or so later. "What on earth is the matter with you? You reported Mike to the police? He was only attempting to assist me with my relocation. I didn't bother answering at all." Mike had no plans to move in. The narrative is over. Susan wasn't finished, though. I heard her car arrive a few hours later. She slammed the door behind her as she entered, and I braced myself. She appeared to be prepared for a brawl as she had some papers in her hand. "What is this?" She shoved the papers at me and demanded. I swear I nearly laughed when I glanced at them. These were sporadic printouts from the internet concerning eviction laws and tenant rights. I returned them to her. This doesn't apply to you, Susan. I spoke with a lawyer already. I gave you enough warning from month to month. You have nothing to stand on. Her face flushed. I definitely have rights, Mike says. Furthermore, a pregnant lady cannot be simply thrown away. This is where my family and I call home. To stop myself from screaming, I had to inhale deeply. I finished telling you this, Susan. In addition to disrespecting me and my housemates and breaking house rules, Mike is now attempting to move in behind my back. You've got 30 days. That's all. She crumpled the papers and looked at me for a while, her hands trembling. This is something you will regret. Dad is already on my side, and he will force you to let me remain once he realizes how cruel you are. I gave a sour laugh. In this household, Dad has no voice. I own it. You may weep all you want, Susan, but it won't make a difference. She appeared ready to cry once again, but instead she rushed to her room and shut the door. I thought it would come off the hinges since it was so hard. It is. The following 2 days were stressful. Susan spent most of her time pouting in her room, but if she left, she made sure to stomp about the house or smash the doors. The vibe was terrible, but she didn't talk to anyone, as if we were all treading carefully. Although Kim and Jack avoided her, she had had enough. He confronted Susan in the kitchen on the second day after she neglected to clean up after herself and left dirty dishes stacked in the sink. Susan, you're not alone in this place. Tidy up your mess. Susan retaliated. You might not even belong here. This is not a place for freeloaders. It is for families. And you told me what Susan had said right away. It seemed unbelievable to me. My housemates were being publicly attacked by Susan. The same individuals who have only shown her patience. No sense. Without Susan, I convened a house meeting that evening. Jack, Kim, and I took a seat. We all concurred. We couldn't allow Susan to continue causing misery in the house. I assured them I would take care of it. I sent Susan one last message the next morning. You have 30 days to leave the property, and this is your second reminder. Your treatment of me and the other renters has gone too far, even though I've been more than fair. I'll bring my lawyer in once again if you keep harassing people or breaking home rules. I knew her, but she didn't answer. She is preparing her next action. The household tension had reached an intolerable level. Susan was still pouting in her room, stomping around like a whiny kid every time she went to the restroom or kitchen. In order to avoid her fury, my other roommates, Jack, Kim, and N.E., had been moving very carefully. We all knew what she was capable of, so no one wanted to set her off. In my mind, I was keeping track of the days until her 30-day notice expired. I kept telling myself that this nightmare will stop if we simply rode out the clock. Susan, however, had other ideas. On a Saturday afternoon, everything came to a head. I was arranging some items for my little company in the garage. Jack rushed out to fetch me when I heard yelling coming from inside the home. Susan is going crazy, dude. Breathless, he said. She is yelling at me and flinging objects all around the living room. I threw everything down and rushed inside. Susan was in full tantrum mode as I entered the living room. She was pacing the room with tears flowing down her face and stood close to the wall with her arms crossed, appearing both shocked and furious. You folks lack gratitude. Susan's voice cracked as she yelled, I'm expecting a child. All of you are treating me like trash when I'm pregnant. What the devil is happening, Susan? Trying to speak steadily, I asked. She pointed a trembling finger at my face and turned on me. You? You are solely to blame for this. You're dismissing me as like I'm nothing, even though I told you I needed help. Family doesn't matter to you. Neither my baby nor I are important to you. She grabbed one of the throw pillows from the couch and threw it across the room like a weapon before I could react. He eventually lost it when it struck the coffee table and knocked Annie's water bottle over, spilling it all over the place. Susan, you are a crazy person. This is it, but I've been patient. Even though we haven't done anything wrong, you're treating us like trash. You're causing constant misery across the entire house. Susan let out a cry and gripped her stomach as if she were the ultimate sufferer. Since I moved in, I've been the one who has been treated like trash. I only needed a little help. And from the beginning, you have all opposed me. I inhaled deeply while attempting to remain composed as I walked towards her. This must end, Susan. In a house that isn't yours, you can't act out and ruin things. I've been fair enough. You're making things more difficult than they need to be. I think I saw something change for a second as Susan's eyes sharpened at me. The weeping had stopped. It was rage. With a sudden quietness and menace in her voice, she continued, "You think you're so righteous. This house is not yours. This is where Grandma would have wanted me. Her desire would have been for me to have a secure location for my child." I couldn't resist laughing bitterly. "Are you serious?" During her lifetime, Grandma forbade Mike from entering the house. Because it works for you, you're attempting to change history. Susan, this is my home, not yours. No longer Mike's and most definitely not Grandma's. You must come to terms with that. For a little minute, she stood still, staring at me as if I had just smacked her. Then, she did something that caught me off guard. She rushed to her bedroom and slammed the door so forcefully that a painting fell from the wall. There was silence in the home for the next hour. We remained in the kitchen waiting as Jack and Kim helped me wipe up the water that Susan had spilt. We were all on edge, but none of us knew what she would do next. Susan then returned downstairs. A suitcase was being pulled behind her this time. Mike was driving outdoors in his pickup, jerking the horn. Susan passed by without saying anything to either of us. She appeared enraged, as though she had swallowed her pride, but it was still burning behind the tears that were smearing her cheeks. She paused when she got to the front door and turned to look at me. With a chilly tone, she remarked, "I hope you're happy. Everything is damaged by you. I will ensure that Mom and Dad are well aware of how terrible you are. One day you will regret this." Calmly, I said, "I'm sure I won't." After giving me a brief scowl, she rushed outside. After Mike packed her bag into the vehicle, they took off, squealing tires on the roadway. After she left, the home seemed oddly silent, as if we had all just made it through a hurricane. For a minute, I stood in the living room, trying to take it all in. Jack approached me from the side and gave me a shoulder pat. "Well," he continued, "that was dramatic." As she joined us, he mumbled, "Understatement of the year." I'm simply relieved that she's gone at last. It's unbelievable that she had such a complete outburst. She will go out with a bang, I knew. Kim shook her head and added, "At least it's over, though." It was, too. It felt like I could breathe again for the first time in weeks. Susan kept flooding my phone with irate voicemails and texts throughout the course of the following several days. I paid them all no attention. My father yelled at me on 2 separate occasions, accusing me of being a monster and abandoning my sister. I wasn't going to back down, though. I gently informed him that I wasn't responsible for solving Susan's difficulties because she had created her own bed. The texts and calls eventually ceased. Susan must have realized that she was not making progress with me. Susan is no longer there. The mood in the home shifted dramatically. It felt good to be able to unwind once more with Jack, Kim, and E. Her room was left in disarray, so we tidied it up and, just for peace of mind, I changed the locks one final time. In retrospect, I have no regrets. I defended my house, my friends, and myself. Susan made an effort to coerce, threaten, and guilt-trip me into giving up all I had fought so hard to achieve. However, I prevented her. I've come to terms with the fact that my dad and stepmother still support her, even if it stinks. There are those who invariably opt to see what they desire. Finally, I don't care that I know Susan is out there someplace, most likely telling everyone that I'm the bad guy in her narrative. The house seems like home again, and I'm finally free of her craziness. Let this be the lesson you learn from it. This: don't allow entitled individuals to treat you badly simply because they're related. Establish limits. Don't back down, it's worthwhile.